Hi, I'm Sashwati Sarkar, and you're watching The Times of India. As more and more Indian students head abroad, sometimes at a very high financial and personal cost, the question isn't just why they leave. It's about what India can learn from their choices. Today, we explore the gains, the gaps, and the global power plays that are shaping Indian higher education. Joining me today for this discussion is Mr. R.N. Bhaskar, renowned journalist, educationist, and author of Game India and Gautam Adani, Reimagining Business in India and World. Few understand the intersection of policy, business, and education like he does. Let's dive into the questions right away. Welcome to the show, Mr. Bhaskar. So, Mr. Bhaskar, the first question that I would like to ask you is, despite the costs, studying abroad often transforms students, not only just academically, but in terms of exposure and confidence. In your view, what are the most underrated gains of international education that India's domestic system can learn from or replicate?
The most underrated issue in India is that we don't pay our teachers well enough. Point one. Point two, many of the teachers in government colleges are appointed on the basis of reservations and other categories and not on the basis of merit. When it's a good teacher, you have to look at his ability to teach, not just qualifications, not whether you can tick off the boxes that he belongs to this category, this category, this category. Fine. It is not eligibility, it is his teaching ability. If the teacher teaches well, the student learns. If the teacher doesn't teach well, the student gets pissed off and he doesn't know to study that subject anymore.
So, this is you mean to say that the quality of teaching is the most underrated international gain of international
The most
education?
underrated in India. So when you go overseas, you get teachers who are good. As against studying in India, where your teachers are not always necessarily good.
Right. But why do you think that this is the underrated gain of studying of international education? It's not an underrated gain of international education. That is the reason why people go to study
They
abroad.
go to abroad for three reasons. One is good teaching. The second is good exposure.
Right. So it's
And the third is the ability to mingle with other students freely. And
absolutely, absolutely.
those are the three.
So this is something that is known. That is what draws students out of India. But I am talking about the most underrated gains of international education, which Indian students are not aware of.
The most underrated, the one thing that very few people talk about is the high cost of education, which you may not be able to recover in terms of placement or in terms of future jobs. I mean, look at Americans themselves. Students are burdened under student loans. This was not the case in the past. In the past, fees were kept low, students learned, and they could get back a lot of gain from the studying that they had done. Today,
Right. So this is the disadvantage of
this
studying
is one
abroad.
disadvantage that people don't take into account. Going to Harvard will give you good connections, but if you can't get at least a percentage of the fees that you paid or the costs that you've incurred, then it's a disaster for a middle class family or a poor family. The rich, it doesn't matter.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just the way you said, the skyrocketing cost of studying abroad is not factored in. I mean, people are aware of it, and that's why there are so many so many plannings and financial aids. But I'm saying, just the way this is something that the aspirants do not always factor in, that what they are putting their parents through. Is there any gain that our study abroad aspirants do not factor
Well,
in?
let me put it differently. Okay? When you choose a place overseas, don't go by the past reputations. Look at the future
Right.
potential. Let me give you two examples. When students want to study medicine overseas, they find the US costs very high, so they go to Russia. They used to go to Ukraine. They go to Spain. And many 25,000 students are there in China. Why is it dangerous not to take
Right.
into account one important factor in medicine? That besides good teaching, besides a good university, you need lots of patience. In many countries, you don't have that many people, so you don't get that many patients to practice on. In China, you get lots of patients. Okay? Now,
Right.
that is one factor that many people don't take into account. Point two, in China, I finished 5 years of education with residency at under 25 lakhs. In India, it costs you 1 crore as capitation fee plus annual fees. In the US, it's about a crore. So you have to take into account the entire cost, not just education fees, but the staying costs and other miscellaneous costs.
There are other and hidden costs as well. There will be lab costs.
There
There
is
will
a
be,
third issue,
yeah, so
there is
many
a
of
third
them.
issue in many countries, many people don't really take into account. Is the economy of that country going up or down? The whole of the West is a declining economy. You have a declining economy, which means you won't get jobs there easily. While if you go to Bangladesh, which also teaches medicine, chances of you being reappointed in a government college, a government hospital are enormously good. Plus, you get lots of patients there. Or if you go to China, once you go there, chances are that you're a very good doctor. Either China itself will absorb you, or any of the developing countries in Africa or Southeast Asia will absorb you. So people have to look at whether the economies are growing or not growing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Indian students are now reaching Ivy Leagues, Oxbridge, and top research hubs. Do you see this global presence shaping India's soft power or policy influence in the long run? How can we better leverage this global
Well,
network?
there are two ways. Just consider Chinese students going overseas and Indian students going overseas. Chinese students go overseas to learn something and go back to China. Indian students go overseas to get a job overseas and then normally don't come back to India. Why? Why? The reason is in that country they make sure that the students who come back are given decent jobs. India is not concentrated on the employment factor and the intellectual satisfaction factor. So a boy who studied nuclear physics in America comes back to India, finds that nobody wants him. Or the salary is a pittance. So he goes back to America and stays there.
No, that's the question. Like, if many, I mean, most Indian students wouldn't want to come back to India after studying in the US, but this global presence is is it somehow playing to India's advantage, in terms of soft power or policy influence in the in the larger
It
framework?
could work as a prominent soft power provided you treat Indians with dignity overseas. Let an Indian lose his passport or go to the Indian embassy and see the way he's treated. I mean, that's a sure way.
So there are many Indians. We know that there are many Indians in Trump's inner circle as
Yes,
well.
which is true. But the average Indian who has reached the top will not help other Indians because his own position is precarious. And the average Indian is scared of being accused of favoritism. The average Indian is not as helpful, except maybe the Bengalis and the Keralites and the Tamilians. Those are thickly networked and they help each other, provided you belong to that network.
Right. So what is a better way to leverage the global network?
The best way to leverage the global network is by first creating a certain amount of dignity at home. If you're a beggar and you go overseas, you're treated as a beggar. Your strength
Absolutely.
overseas depends on your strength in India. Let me give you an example. When Sushma Swaraj was External Affairs Minister, India was growing at 8 to 10% under Vajpayee. And she could actually squeeze the arms of every ambassador overseas. Said, if any Indian complains to me that he can't get his problems redressed immediately, I shall remove you from your jobs. And if you look at the way Indian embassies, Indian consulates treated Indians in those days with the way they treat them now, if you have pride in yourself at home, you network very well. If you lose pride at home, you don't network very well overseas.
Very pertinent point, indeed. Very pertinent point. So, Mr. Bhaskar, we are seeing many Indian private universities are partnering with global institutions for joint degrees and research. Do you see this hybrid model as the future, offering the best of both worlds to Indian
I
students?
welcome such models under two conditions. You allow, I'm not telling you allow foreign universities, let's say Harvard or a Columbia or a Princeton or Chicago, whoever, you call them over to India, they partner with an Indian university and they offer the best of courses. One, there's no restriction on the fees they can charge. B, there are no government regulations that teachers they appoint. Even there, the government tries to interfere. Look at the kind of problems Reliance is having with its international school. The government's tendency to keep interfering with the teachers colleges appoint, with the people you give jobs to, is what is upsetting Indian universities. Now, a government college has no choice. He can't even fight. You tie Indian teachers in Indian colleges, you tie the hands behind the back, and then tell them to compete with an international college. It doesn't work. You're going to destroy the talent at home. You're going to make education expensive and substandard. So, yes, the hybrid model is the best model for India, provided the government allows Indian government owned and private colleges to compete head on with the same privileges, with the same advantages that those universities have. Let me give you a corollary. To start to
Please.
start a campus overseas, you need government permission. So SP Jain got his permission. Narsimmunji has not yet got his permission. Now, if you are being selected which universities are going to go overseas, let them compete in the international markets. Just say Harvard wants to come to India, let these people go overseas. It's their choice. Now, the advantages when a SP Jain opens a campus in Dubai, he pays world standard salaries to teachers there and then uses them as a sabbatical and churns the teachers between India and Dubai. So you get world class teachers teaching even in India and both benefit. And the Indian teacher gets a chance to teach overseas. Now, when the government says, no, you can't open a new branch overseas, it took IIT Bombay 20 years to get permission. Now, when you don't allow your Indian universities to grow, and then you say, no, we must be competitive, it doesn't work that way.
Right. Why do you think Indian students are still willing to take on debt or struggle abroad despite having access to good colleges, good in quotes, at home? Is it about quality, aspiration, or something else?
Quality and travel and networking. You have three things when you go overseas. You get quality education, you get networking, because when you grow into the world of commerce and into the world of business, and you're my classmate, 5 years later I can say, listen, you're in Paris. Do you think you'll find a placement for me? There's a network established. And the third is, so first is good teaching. Second is networking with peers, with students who come from all countries and generally a little more affluent. And the third advantage is travel and seeing the world. Traveling also makes you a little wiser.
Right, right. Your views of life and your perspectives, all of them, the horizon is
You
broadened.
begin to realize that there's not a frog in the well.
There is no denying that.
You realize there are too many whales and there are too many frogs, and you learn to meet all of them. Okay.
Too many frogs and too many wells. Right. Well said, well said.
That's what.
What are your thoughts on the rise of edufintech firms offering quick loans to students aspiring to study abroad? Are we bridging access, or we are simply building a bubble?
Well, first, let me give three answers to this. First, any loan is dangerous. As like our forefathers used to say, never borrow, never lend. You lose a friend, you lose your money if you lend. When you borrow, you are more concerned about paying back the loan and not really studying. Loan should not be on the top of your head. So, A, the borrowing itself is not a very good idea. Second, when you're borrowing in another currency, you're exposed to currency risks. And three, because you got a loan on the head, you want to start earning as quickly as possible and sometimes make the wrong choices for career, for earning, for growth. You take shortcuts. So, fintech makes loans available easily. But if a person does not understand what that loan will entail and is not prepared for the risks that are involved, then it's dangerous. So if you're a rich family, you don't want to take your parents' money, you want to take a loan because you think that's a better way your parents can use the money for in equity markets or wherever. Then that's fine. There's no risk for you. But if you're a middle class family or a not so rich family, then you need to think very carefully.
So, given the growing scrutiny and shifting immigration policies in countries like UK, US, and Canada, how vulnerable do you think is India's outbound student economy to sudden policy shocks?
To answer that, let me take a digression. Education, especially higher education, normally has a philosophy behind it. The most progressive countries know that education is a long term investment. And so the governments pick up the best talent available and keep the fees low because the talented student then comes into the country and can be used to harness the economy of that recipient country itself. Now, when suddenly universities start thinking about making money on the courses now, you become commercial, which is what all American universities have become, which is what the UK universities have become, which fortunately is not what the European universities have. The universities in Europe are subsidized by the government to make sure that education remains reasonably priced and they get the best talent in their country to help both the university and the country itself. That is what China is doing. And that is why China has the best teachers. China has been climbing the rankings of the top universities in the world faster than any other country. And I don't know whether you know this, but when it comes to semiconductor technology, the US itself conducted a survey just last month. The top 10 universities in semiconductor and chip making technologies, 8 universities are Chinese. One is Singaporean, and not even one is a US company. Why? Because you plan investments in education for a 50-year horizon. You don't start charging money right now. It is a way of short circuiting yourself. And then when you have students in universities and you tell them that they can't even protest and you threaten teachers with dismissal, which is what is happening in America, then you're jettisoning both the university and the students' careers. Look at the way the government in the US is going after Harvard. It has set the IRS upon them. It has cancelled all funding to IRS, to Harvard. And Harvard
Right.
has asked its alumni to contribute whatever they can so that the university remains independent and alive. That is not a very nice thought. If I've taken admission to Harvard,
That's very, very unfortunate. Yeah. Whatever happened with Harvard and many other universities are in the line of fire, if I may
exactly.
say so.
Now, Yale has decided to challenge the government. One by one, the universities are beginning to find their spine and get back and fight back.
Do you think India can ever become a destination for global learners? What would it take for India to reverse the flow and attract international students at scale, at a large
Let me give
scale?
you the example of IITs. IITs are easily the best engineering colleges in India. Okay. Have you allowed IITs to increase the capacity and increase the teaching strength by 20% year on year? They've got a waiting list of 20 lakh students. who have performed brilliantly in the JEE examinations. They have the talent, but they're not in the top 200 or top 2000. And there are 10 lakhs lying behind.
Yeah, IITs are not in the in the QS rankings or TAG financial rankings. They are
No
not.
Indian university is higher than 150. The IITs begin after 150. Now, China exists in the top 100. It's not reached the top 10, but it'll reach there. Now, why hasn't India been able to get the rankings? The government interferes and tells the IIMs, we are going to decide who should be in the governing board. Your autonomy is cancelled. It tells the IITs the same thing. You don't give them money to build a hostel. So the IITs, which are designed to have one room per student, now they have to have three people per room. Now, in IITs, you get up early in the morning to study. And if I'm studying and my roommate is sleeping, I get annoyed. I can't study because even I feel sleepy.
But apart from that, do you think the research infrastructure is well built in India? As like say, somebody's studying a CSE, computer science in an IIT, and somebody studying a computer science in Harvard or Stanford. The research infrastructure and research facilities and the approach towards, knowledge acquisition. Do you think they are same?
In some ways, yes, in some ways, no. Let me explain. IITs do very well, not necessarily because of teachers or infrastructure. It's because the students are bright and are taking only the top 0.1% of the population. If you take 0.1% of the US population, they'll be as bright as the IIT students. The IIT student is highly motivated. Even without the teacher, he will learn. But if you get a good teacher, it accelerates his learning. But the government has brought in government rules even for teaching. And that does not give you the academic freedom that a university requires. Let the teachers decide who the peer competitor should be in the university. Which teacher should get an increment. Not because it's close to the minister. If you allow that, the teacher grows. And the teacher does well. IIT Bombay, IIT Madras has actually spearheaded incubation companies where they incubate students to start ventures, and each professor has a small equity stake. So there's an incentive for him to make the project grow. Many of the IITs have not given that facility, and definitely the non-IITs are never given that facility because the government says that's a conflict of interest. You're supposed to teach or make money. I mean, is there a division?
Also, I think the approach towards multidisciplinary and experiential learning in India, I mean, it's at a very nascent stage to say
One
the
is that, and the
least.
second is, one is that, and the second is ideology. They want IITs to start teaching yoga and Sanskrit. Why don't we let the teachers decide what they have to teach? These are institutes of higher education. These are institutes of excellence. Let them decide. The minister does not have excellence. Otherwise, he'd be in an IIT. And I often tell my minister, when I meet ministers, I tell them, please remember, if a teacher does something wrong, he's dismissed. If you do something wrong, you're not dismissed. He has a better moral standing than you have.
Right. So I'll come to my concluding question now. You've chronicled powerful business empires and education systems. If you had to design an ideal study abroad policy for India, one that balances aspiration, affordability, and national interest as well, what would it look like?
First, I would focus on improving my domestic industries for several reasons. Every student who goes overseas uses foreign exchange, uses the talent that he's got from his home country, and goes overseas and seldom returns. If I have to create an environment where students grow, first go overseas and make sure that when he finishes, he has a job which is available, which means you have to get investors investing in India, which means your investment climate has to be friendlier. If your investment climate is not friendly, big companies don't invest, better jobs don't come in. Investment climate and education are linked. If you have a myopic view on investments, you will have a myopic view on education as well.
Right. So, building domestic infrastructure and an environment where students can rest assured that they'll get their desired job
You
opportunities
allow Indian
back in
universities
India.
to excel.
That's the first thing.
You also create enough infrastructure for them to get jobs, which means your investment climate has your first rate. If you don't do that, students will run out of India as quickly as possible. Look at the number of multimillionaires who are leaving India. 6,500 each year. They would have created jobs here. Why are they leaving? Because India is not a right place for business now. In 2010, 1 lakh students surrender their passports every year. For the last 3 years, it's 2 lakh plus. Every year they're surrendering their passports. What does that mean? This is not a country for us.
Mr. Bhaskar, thanks a lot for your time and very crucial and critical insights. I'm sure this will be an eye opener for our audience.
I hope so.
Thanks a lot
Thanks
for
a
your
lot.
time.